Have you ever been incredibly passionate about a project? Like, totally prepared, you've got a great team, maybe even backed by a really solid budget, but then you completely miss the mark because you didn't actually understand the people right in front of you.
Oh, man. Yeah. It's a profoundly disorienting experience.
Right. I want you, the listener, to really think about that for a second. You had the right intentions, the energy was there, you followed the textbook on how to launch this thing.
Yeah, you checked all the boxes.
Exactly. But the execution just lands completely flat. And you're left standing there just scratching your head wondering, what just happened?
Because our default mental model is just, it's highly binary, especially in leadership or organizational culture.
How so?
Well, we operate on this deeply ingrained assumption that if the input is high quality, like if our intentions are pure and we work really hard, then the output is just going to automatically follow.
Right, like an equation.
Exactly. We think effectiveness is a direct, uncomplicated result of effort. But reality, especially when it involves actual human beings in a specific environment, is infinitely messier than a simple input-output equation.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because that exact tension, that collision between our beautiful, pristine plans and the messy reality of the people we're actually trying to reach, that is exactly what we're getting into today.
And we've got some incredible material to ground this deep dive.
We really do. We are looking at a deeply fascinating manuscript titled Zalo 7 Contextual Analysis, Where Has God Placed Us? And I want to set the stage for you right out of the gate.
Yeah, the context of the source is important here.
Right. This is a highly specific source document. It's written specifically as a strategic and theological guide for church leaders. So it uses religious language, it draws heavily on biblical history, and its whole framework is built around ministry and spiritual mission.
But, and this is the crucial part, the underlying mechanics it describes are totally universal.
That is exactly what struck me. Like, as I was absorbing this material, I just couldn't stop thinking about how this operates as a masterclass for practically anyone.
Oh, absolutely.
If you're a startup founder trying to find product market fit, or a community organizer rallying your neighborhood, or, a manager taking over a new department, the blind spots this document identifies are identical across the board.
They really are.
Yeah.
It dissects this phenomenon that we can basically call mission blindness.
Vision blindness, yeah.
Which is such an apt term, right?
Right.
Because the quiet, sort of insidious risk that this material points out right at the beginning is that the biggest threat to an organization usually isn't a lack of passion.
We always assume it is, though.
We do. We assume if a church or a nonprofit or a business is failing to connect, well, the people inside just don't care enough, or they've gotten lazy. But this material argues something entirely different.
Right. It says the failure isn't in the passion. The failure is in the perception.
Exactly. It's an inability to actually read the field accurately.
The phrase that really jumped out at me was this idea that you can have a sincere mission, a perfectly articulated message, and this incredibly willing team, and still completely miss the people who have been placed right in front of you.
It's sobering.
It's a punch to the gut for anyone who prides themselves on their hustle. If I'm putting in 80 hours a week and I have a great product or message, the idea that I could still be totally irrelevant because I'm just fundamentally misreading my environment, that's terrifying.
Well, let's look at the foundational mechanism of why that happens. The material introduces a distinction that essentially serves as the bedrock for this entire deep dive.
Yeah, let's get into that.
It separates two concepts that we constantly, conflate: familiarity and understanding. We just assume that because we are familiar with a space, we inherently understand it.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
The argument presented here is that a church congregation might physically occupy a building in a specific neighborhood for 50 years, right? They know their own internal rhythms flawlessly.
Right. They know exactly what time the Sunday service starts.
They know the internal politics of the choir. They know exactly where the good coffee is kept. And because they pull into that exact same parking lot week after week, year after year, they feel this deep, intuitive sense of knowing that place.
But they don't, really.
Not at all. They might be entirely, comprehensively blind to the changing realities of the actual streets immediately surrounding their building.
This instantly made me think of the daily commute phenomenon. Like, if you are listening to this on your way to work right now, just think about your drive.
Oh, that's a perfect analogy.
You drive the exact same route every single morning, right? You feel completely familiar with it. You know exactly which lane to merge into to avoid that one terrible pothole on the highway.
You know the exact rhythm of the traffic lights.
Exactly. Your brain essentially goes on autopilot because the route is just so deeply familiar to you. But if I were to sit you down at your desk and say, hey, what are the names of the 3 specific small businesses on the corner of 4th and Elm?
You'd have no idea.
Right. Or if I asked, what is the primary demographic of the people walking out of that massive apartment complex you stop in front of every morning? You would probably just stare at me blankly.
Because your familiarity is purely navigational.
Navigational, exactly.
You know how to move through the space, but you haven't actually done the hard work to understand the space. Your brain, functioning as this efficiency engine, has literally tuned out the details because it doesn't think it needs them to survive the commute.
And this is exactly what happens to organizations. Familiarity actually breeds a kind of blindness.
It really does. We stop actively looking because we just assume we already know what's out there. We saw it, 10 years ago, we categorized it, and we just completely stopped updating our mental software.
And when an outreach strategy or a massive business launch or a new community program is built on that 10-year-old assumption instead of active present-day observation,
It fails.
it completely misses the exact people it was designed to reach.
What's fascinating here is how the underlying psychology of this blindness is framed in the source. It isn't born out of malice.
Right. They aren't trying to be irrelevant.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's not that these leaders are sitting in a boardroom, evil laughing and saying, we don't care about our neighbors.
Yeah.
It stems from a deeply held, but ultimately false certainty.
All certainty.
Yeah. Let's look at it through the lens of the church leaders this document was originally written for. They possess a strong, historically rooted, unchanging message.
Yeah.
The gospel.
Right.
The psychological trap is that they assume the certainty and the power of their message automatically grants them an understanding of their field. They think, because what I have to say is true, I don't need to actually study the people I'm saying it to.
Oh, man. So their confidence in the product makes them lazy about the market?
Precisely. The absolute certainty of their theology completely blinds them to the shifting nuances of their sociology. And the ultimate result of that, as the material sharply points out, isn't that the community rebels against them.
No, it's not a protest.
It's much worse than that. It leads to irrelevance.
Irrelevance. I mean, that is the true nightmare scenario, isn't it? You aren't being actively protested against. You aren't being fought. You are just being completely, utterly ignored.
You're just background noise.
Because you're answering questions that literally no one in your actual neighborhood is asking, and you are completely silent on the real pressures they are actually facing.
And when you reach that state of irrelevance, what usually happens, leadership teams retreat inward.
They circle the wagons.
Exactly. They start designing these elaborate strategies for the community they imagine exists, or maybe the community that used to exist 20 years ago, or the one they wish existed.
Rather than the one actually living within a 1-mile radius of their front door.
Right. I mean, think about the sheer complexity of a single city block today. Within just a few streets, you can have multiple layers of culture, wildly different economic realities, varying levels of education.
And vastly different attitudes toward religion or authority, yeah.
Exactly. If your familiarity makes you assume it's all just one homogeneous block of people, you are entirely missing the critical nuances that dictate how a human being will actually hear and receive what you are trying to tell them.
So, okay, if having a pristine, powerful message or, the perfect product or the ultimate truth, if that isn't enough to break through that irrelevance on its own, how do we bridge that gap?
That's the core question.
Because this raises a massive point about how truth is supposed to interact with the real world. And this leads us to what the manuscript frames as the theology of placement.
This is where the material really elevates the concept of contextual analysis. Like in a corporate setting, doing a demographic study or a SWOT analysis is just standard managerial hygiene, right? It's just a pragmatic tool.
Something you hand off to the marketing intern.
Yeah, exactly. But here, understanding your environment is elevated to a profound theological responsibility. The core argument is that God plants his people in actual, highly specific contexts for actual, highly specific purposes.
So placement is not random.
Placement is an act of providence.
That reframes everything. If you truly believe your placement is providential, it means you can't view your neighborhood as just, a convenient, cheap piece of real estate you happen to buy.
Right.
You are there on purpose. There's this fascinating historical anchor provided in the material regarding this. It points to the biblical prophet Jeremiah.
Ah, yes. The letter to the exiles.
Yeah. Specifically, his letter to the exiles who had been dragged off to Babylon. He essentially tells them to seek the peace of the city where they have been sent.
Let's consider the psychological and cultural state of those exiles for a moment, because it's vital. They are in a state of violent displacement. They've been uprooted. Their institutions have been totally destroyed, and they are living as captives in Babylon.
Which is a culture that is entirely foreign, hostile, and completely antithetical to their own beliefs.
Exactly. So the natural human impulse in that scenario is extreme self-preservation. The urge is to build a massive wall, hunker down, aggressively protect your traditions, avoid the surrounding culture entirely, and just, wait it out until you can go back to where things make sense.
It's the ultimate us versus them bunker mentality, which is honestly how a lot of organizations operate today when the market shifts.
Yeah, they retreat. But the command these exiles receive is the exact opposite of hunkering down. The directive is to actively engage with that specific, unfamiliar, even hostile context.
They're told to plant gardens, right?
Plant gardens, build houses, and actively work for the flourishing of this foreign city. The profound takeaway here is that the mission is not suspended just because the setting is unfamiliar or uncomfortable.
Wow.
You don't get a pass on understanding your environment just because you wish you were planted somewhere easier.
And the material takes that concept to its ultimate theological conclusion by pointing to the incarnation. The Word became flesh and dwelt among us. I really appreciate how the author forces the reader to look at the granular reality of that event.
It wasn't an abstraction.
No, Jesus didn't arrive as a theoretical concept. He didn't save humanity by shouting instructions from a safe, sterile, abstract distance.
He entered a hyper-specific location at a hyper-specific moment in history. If we connect this to the bigger picture of placement, the incarnation is the ultimate validation of context.
Yeah, elaborate on that.
Well, he was born into the geopolitical reality of Roman occupation, right? He stepped into a highly complex web of Jewish religious expectations and factions. He didn't speak in floating philosophical generalities. He engaged with the actual dirt and disease of his day.
Right, he physically touched lepers in a society where doing that made you a total outcast.
Exactly. Yeah. He crossed intense ethnic and social boundaries to speak with Samaritans. Yeah. He confronted the very specific, localized economic corruption that was exploiting the poor in the temple courts. He allowed his context to deeply shape the methodology of his ministry.
Okay, let me pause you there because I want to push back on this a little bit.
Sure, go for it.
I want to play the role of the frustrated traditionalist who is listening to this and feeling their blood pressure rise.
I know the type.
Right. Because if the message, the gospel, or the core truth of this organization is divinely inspired, absolute, and totally unchanging, shouldn't it just work everywhere right out of the box?
That's the assumption.
Yeah, why does the environment matter so much if the truth is absolute? 2 + 2 = 4. It equals 4 if I write it on a chalkboard in New York, and it equals 4 if I write it on a napkin in Tokyo.
Right.
I don't need to study the deep cultural history of Tokyo to know that math works, so why can't I just stand on my corner, declare the absolute truth, and let the chips fall where they may?
It's a very common pushback, and honestly, it sounds fiercely loyal to the truth. But it relies on a completely flawed understanding of how human beings process reality.
Okay, how so?
The material addresses this head-on by drawing a brilliant necessary distinction between abstraction and reality. Yes, the truth of the gospel or the core value of whatever mission you are on may be absolute and unchanging, but the text explicitly argues that this message never, ever arrives in a vacuum.
It has to land somewhere.
Precisely. It lands in physical, complicated, messy spaces. It arrives in gritty urban streets, in wealthy, isolated office towers, in overcrowded migrant quarters, and in these hyper-anxious digital spaces.
And those spaces aren't neutral.
Not at all. Those spaces and the minds of the people inhabiting them are not blank slates waiting for your perfect math equation. They are already deeply shaped by prior memories, by generational wounds, by systemic distrust, by economic terror, or, by the isolating effects of extreme wealth.
I see. So, using the math analogy. Yes, 2 + 2 is always 4. But if I am trying to teach that equation to someone who has been verbally abused and traumatized by math teachers for their entire life...
The approach has to change.
Exactly. The way I present that truth has to fundamentally change. If I just scream, 2 + 2 is 4, at them, the absolute truth of the math is completely eclipsed by the trauma triggered by my delivery.
Yes.
I might be technically correct, but I am practically useless.
That is a perfect translation of the concept. The material states that taking context seriously is not a compromise of truth. It is actually an act of reverence.
Reverence, that's a really strong word to use for what sounds like demographic research.
It is, because it implies that God is already at work in that community long before you even arrive with your clipboard or your sermon.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. If you just barge into a neighborhood with your prepackaged, out-of-the-box solution, completely ignoring the lived reality, the pain, and the language of the people there, you aren't showing reverence for the truth. You are just demonstrating arrogance about your delivery method.
You're demanding that they do the work.
Exactly. You're demanding that the community adapt to you rather than you doing the hard work of adapting your delivery to them.
There's a line in the notes that says, Scripture itself refuses abstraction. God didn't stay in the realm of theory. He got his hands dirty in the specific soil of a specific place.
Which deeply challenges modern organizational thinking across the board. I mean, in business, in tech, in modern megachurch models, we absolutely worship scale.
Oh, yeah. Scale is everything.
We love the plug-and-play franchise model. We want to design a program, a service, or an app once in a sterile laboratory and then deploy it 10,000 times without having to change a single variable.
Because it's efficient.
It is efficient, it is manageable, and it is highly profitable. But this framework is arguing that if you want to be faithful to a mission that actually transforms human lives, you cannot ignore the specific, granular, messy reality of the place you are planted.
Scale demands ignoring context.
Exactly. Whereas profound impact requires deeply embracing it.
If that's true, it creates a massive tension for a leader, right? Because if the core message is absolute and non-negotiable, but the environment it has to land in is highly specific and constantly changing, how do you bridge that gap without losing the soul of what you are doing? Like, how do you adapt to a culture without just completely compromising and becoming a mirror of that culture?
This is perhaps the most critical pivot in the entire manuscript. It addresses this tension by exposing a massive, recurring error that leaders make: confusing the message with the method.
The art of faithful translation.
Yes. The text argues fiercely that while the gospel itself does not change, the method of its delivery absolutely must be translated. And there is a quote here that we honestly just need to frame and put on a wall. Translation is not dilution, it is fidelity.
Translation is not dilution, it is fidelity. That's so good.
Let's explore the mechanics of literal language translation to understand why that is so profound. If you want to translate a deeply emotional, beautiful poem from Spanish into English, you cannot just do a rigid one-to-one word swap.
No, it would be a mess.
Exactly.
Yeah.
If you use a dictionary to translate each word directly in order, the result won't be a beautiful poem. It will be awkward, confusing gibberish.
Right.
To truly translate the poem, the translator has to understand the cultural idioms, the historical weight of certain phrases, the intended rhythm, the emotional resonance. You actually have to change the specific words being used in order to preserve and communicate the actual meaning of the original work.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because when organizations fail to understand translation, they end up importing displaced models.
Displaced models, yes.
The material notes that importing a ministry model, say a highly produced, heavily programmed church model that worked brilliantly in a wealthy suburban context, into a new, totally different environment, like an urban, working-class neighborhood, it's going to fail spectacularly.
It has to fit.
And the crucial point is that it won't fail because the original suburban model is inherently evil or unbiblical. It fails because it is displaced. It's an immigrant model refusing to learn the local language.
So the analogy you and I were discussing earlier perfectly encapsulates this. Imagine a highly decorated, brilliant city planner. Right. They spend a decade developing a state-of-the-art, highly efficient snow removal strategy for the state of Michigan.
That's an analogy.
They're the routing optimized, the salt deployment is mathematically perfected, the plow schedules are dialed in. It is a flawless system. It wins awards.
Best snowplow strategy in the country.
Exactly. Then that planner gets hired to run the public works department in a city in Florida.
And because they are just so confident in their award-winning system, they insist on deploying the exact same snow removal strategy in the middle of a sweltering Florida summer.
Right.
They literally send the plows out onto the hot asphalt. They're dumping salt on the palm trees.
And the strategy itself isn't bad. I mean, the math behind the routing might still be perfect, but the context violently rejects it.
Because there is no snow.
There is no snow. The problem the system was designed to solve literally does not exist in this environment.
And you can almost see the psychological spiral of that city planner. When the citizens of Florida start complaining about the noise of the plows scraping the asphalt or the salt ruining their lawns, the planner gets deeply defensive.
Oh, they double down.
Yeah, they look at the citizens and say, "You people just don't appreciate excellence. This is an award-winning system. What is wrong with you?" They blame the context for not conforming to their methodology.
It sounds totally absurd when we frame it with snowplows. But the material warns that this exact dynamic happens constantly in ministry, in nonprofits, and in corporate leadership.
All the time.
A leader has a toolbox of methods that worked for them in the past, or maybe methods they learned at a big conference, and when those methods fail in a new neighborhood, they blame the neighborhood.
Right, they say, the market just isn't ready for us.
Or they call the community hard-hearted or unresponsive, when the reality is that the leader is just driving a snowplow on a beach. This is what the manuscript refers to as the danger of building a strategy on preference instead of evidence.
Ouch. Building on preference instead of evidence. That is a surgical strike on a leader's ego.
It is absolutely intended to be, because leaders, particularly in spaces driven by passion or faith, have a really dangerous habit of taking their deep personal preferences and just baptizing them as strategy.
So what does that actually look like in practice?
Well, it looks like a leadership team deciding that their church is going to feature a very specific, aggressive style of modern rock worship music, or maybe a highly intellectual hour-long preaching style, or they decide to target a very specific demographic of young professionals who look and dress exactly like the leadership team.
Right.
And when asked why they are doing it, they will use strategic language. They will say, "We have discerned that this is the most strategic way to reach the culture." But if you actually audit the decision, there is literally zero evidence that the surrounding community wants or needs any of those things.
So it's completely internally driven.
Exactly. The decision wasn't driven by external evidence. It was driven by the internal preference of the leaders.
So they're essentially saying, we aren't doing this because it's what we are comfortable with. We are doing it because it's a strategic imperative, when in reality, it's 100% about their own comfort zone.
Exactly. Preference is not proof. The material argues that this kind of decision-making actually serves the internal anxieties of the leadership way more than it serves the external needs of the community.
It's a shield.
It is a self-protective measure.
Yeah.
It keeps the leaders in a zone where they feel competent, powerful, and culturally at ease, while creating this massive invisible barrier to the actual neighborhood.
To contrast that kind of rigid preference, the text points to the missionary flexibility of the Apostle Paul in the New Testament.
Yes, a great example.
It notes that Paul's methodology was incredibly elastic depending on his context. When he was speaking to philosophers in the Areopagus in Athens, which was a deeply pagan intellectual city, he didn't start quoting Hebrew prophets.
No, they wouldn't have understood that.
Exactly. He actually quoted their own Greek poets to them to build a bridge to his message. But when he was in a Jewish synagogue, he would argue from the deep intricacies of the Torah. He was constantly translating the unchanging absolute truth into the vernacular and the cultural framework of his immediate audience.
And we see the exact same pedagogical brilliance in Jesus himself. I mean, why did he use parables about sowing seeds, pulling weeds, mending fishing nets, and losing coins?
Right.
Did he have a particular theological obsession with agriculture? No. He used those elements because that was the lived reality of the world. His listeners inhabited, they were agrarian peasants, fishermen, and laborers.
He didn't make them learn his language.
Exactly. He didn't demand that they learn a new, high-level theological vocabulary before he would speak to them. He humbled himself to meet them in the vocabulary of their daily labor.
If the founder of the faith is willing to adapt his communication style to the specific daily grind of his audience, it pretty much removes any excuse a modern leader has for stubbornly clinging to their own preferred methods.
It really does.
We have to discard the imported models. We have to be brutally honest enough to discard our own personal preferences if they don't fit the reality of our Florida summer. But that leads us to the big practical hurdle.
How to actually do it.
Right. How exactly do we study that reality? If we agree that we need to map the field, how do we actually do it without just guessing?
Well, the material is very explicit about the starting point. The first duty of mission strategy is not brainstorming. It is not invention. It is observation.
I was really struck by how the author describes observation as an act of humility. That is a profound phrasing. The text says, "We are not the center. We must listen before we lead."
Which flies in the face of our normal expectations.
It totally flies in the face of the heroic leadership narrative, right? Where the visionary leader rides into town, sizes everything up in 5 minutes, and immediately starts issuing directives.
Because listening before leading requires you to suspend your assumptions and admit you don't have the full picture. And the material provides a very specific framework for this listening. It breaks observation down into several overlapping dimensions.
Because context is never one-dimensional.
Exactly. You can't just slap a label on a neighborhood and say, oh, this is a working class area and think you've done the work. A community is a highly complex web of intersecting realities.
Let's walk through these specific dimensions because they serve as incredibly helpful filters for anyone trying to understand a group of people. The text lists 6 primary dimensions: demographics, culture, religion, economics, education, and migration. Let's really dig into what it means to observe these.
Let's begin with demographics. On the surface, this is the most straightforward, right? It answers the question of who is physically present.
The census data, basically.
Basically, what is the age distribution? Is it an aging population of retirees or a neighborhood packed with young families? What is the ethnic makeup? What languages are spoken in the homes? If your church's entire outreach strategy is built around youth programs, but the demographic data shows your surrounding 2 miles is 70% empty nesters.
Your strategy is fighting gravity.
Completely fighting gravity.
Then there is culture, which dictates how meaning is communicated and how relationships function. This is really about the unwritten rules of the neighborhood.
Yes, the invisible scripts.
Do people value extreme individualism and privacy? Or are there strong, interconnected kinship networks? Do they communicate directly and bluntly? Or is communication highly indirect and contextual?
Religion asks about ultimate beliefs. And this doesn't just mean checking a box for Christian or Buddhist or atheist. It asks, what are the functional idols of this community?
Well, that's interesting. Functional idols.
Right. Where do they go for comfort? In a highly affluent secular neighborhood, the functional religion might be career achievement and resume building for their children. In a different neighborhood, it might be a blend of traditional faith and deep-seated folk superstitions. You have to know what ultimate reality they are building their lives on.
Economics is massive. What are the literal pressures of survival? Is this a community dealing with generational poverty, or is it dealing with the unique anxieties of hyperwealth? Are they one missed paycheck away from eviction?
It changes everything about how you engage them.
Because as the material points out, if a neighborhood is facing high economic insecurity, your witness simply cannot be separated from practical, physical compassion. You can't just walk up to a single mother who is terrified about making rent and hand her a theological pamphlet.
No. If you try to do that, your message is entirely muted by the roar of her actual physical crisis.
Yeah.
The gospel must speak into the economic reality. Next is education, which isn't just about whether they have college degrees. It's about how the community processes information.
How they learn.
Exactly. Do they learn through long analytical lectures? Or do they learn through narrative, storytelling, and visual experience? If your communication style is highly academic, but your neighborhood processes information through narrative, you will never connect.
And finally, migration. This one fascinated me. It measures instability or transition. Who is moving into the neighborhood and who is leaving? Is it a highly transient area where people rent an apartment for a year and then move on? Or is it a deeply rooted community where families have lived in the same houses for 4 generations?
The material gives brilliant examples of why this matters. It notes that a young, highly mobile, digitally connected community requires a very different pace of ministry than a settled rural area.
The pace of ministry, yeah.
In a transient urban neighborhood, you might only have 12 months to build a relationship with someone before they move away. You have to move quickly. But in a settled, multi-generational rural network, if you try to move that fast, you will be viewed with intense suspicion. You might need to spend 5 years just earning the right to be heard. The migration pattern dictates the pace of your strategy.
But I have to push back again here. Listening to this list, demographics, culture, religion, economics, education, migration, it sounds overwhelmingly complicated.
It sounds like a dissertation.
Yes. If I'm a local pastor or a small business owner or a neighborhood organizer, am I supposed to become a full-blown sociologist? Do I need to hire a data scientist to crunch census numbers before I can talk to my neighbor? This feels completely paralyzing.
That's a very valid concern. And honestly, if this framework were purely academic, it would be paralyzing. But the manuscript specifically warns against treating these categories as what it calls academic abstractions.
Yeah.
Okay, so
They-
what's the alternative?
But
The goal here is not to produce a peer-reviewed sociological paper with perfect statistical margins of error. The goal is what the author calls truthful awareness.
truthful awareness.
Yes, it means these dimensions must be read pastorally, not just statistically. You aren't gathering data for the sake of having a massive database. You are paying attention to reality so that you can love people effectively.
Right.
In fact, the material suggests that a church doesn't need a massive research grant. Often, simply sitting down to create a one-page context profile is enough to completely shatter their illusions and expose their blind spots.
Because it forces you to face what you don't know.
Exactly. The real value of the exercise is admitting ignorance. If a leadership team sits around a table and tries to fill out a one-page profile on the primary economic pressures facing the people who live within a 10-minute walk of their building, and they realize they're all just guessing,
That's a wake-up call.
that realization is a massive actionable insight. It forces them to realize that their feeling of familiarity was a total illusion. They don't know their neighbors at all.
And when an organization actually pushes past the illusion, when they sit down and map these dimensions honestly, they almost always discover something shocking that was hiding right under their nose. This brings us to what I think is the absolute emotional and strategic core of the document, the case study of the nearby and overlooked.
Oh, this is a powerful section. This case study perfectly illustrates the cost of assumption and the power of observation. The text paints a picture of a hypothetical but incredibly common church scenario.
Yeah, lay it out for us.
This church is analyzing its growth, and they make a very natural, logical assumption. They assume their strongest opportunity for outreach lies among people who look, talk, and act exactly like their current membership.
Which, from a standard marketing perspective, makes perfect sense, right? If you were selling a product, you look at your current best customers and you try to find more people just like them. The church leadership looks at their modern worship music, their Sunday morning schedule, the languages they use, and they say, let's target people who already naturally prefer this kind of environment.
But despite their targeted efforts, and despite pouring money and energy into reaching this preferred demographic, the results are completely stagnant. Attendance remains flat. The strategy is failing.
But then a shift happens. They finally stop assuming, and they start actually observing the neighborhood around them. They walk the streets, they look at the migration patterns and the economics, and they make a startling discovery. They realize that they are physically located adjacent to a highly dense population of migrant workers.
A group that has been completely systemically overlooked by all the existing ministries in the area. Now let's look at why this group was ignored. It wasn't because the church aided them.
Yeah.
It was because reaching this group would require crossing severe cultural, linguistic, and economic barriers. It would require fundamentally changing how the church operated.
But once the church actually sees them, they realize this overlooked population isn't just numerous, they are incredibly receptive. Their physical and spiritual needs are obvious, their access to care or community support is practically non-existent, and crucially, their internal social networks, the way they communicate with each other, are intensely strong.
A word of mouth is powerful.
Exactly. The case study notes that once the church does the hard work of crossing those barriers and actually earns trust with this group, that trust becomes an incredibly powerful bridge for lasting, explosive witness within that community.
It's amazing what happens when you just open your eyes.
I love this story because it highlights such a profound human folly. It's like frantically tearing your house apart looking for your car keys. You are checking under the couch, you are emptying drawers, you are getting incredibly frustrated. And then you finally stop, take a breath, and realize the keys have been sitting in your own pocket the entire time. This church was looking everywhere for a target audience, trying to manufacture momentum, when the greatest mission opportunity they could possibly ask for wasn't across the world or even across the city. It was literally right across the street.
But human nature fights against seeing it. The manuscript offers a piercing psychological insight into why we miss the people right in front of us. It says we naturally reach for people who resemble us because, and this is a direct quote, likeness feels manageable.
Likeness feels manageable. That is devastatingly accurate.
It exposes the core of organizational psychology. We subconsciously want to serve people we already understand, people who share our socioeconomic status, our political leanings, our cultural shorthand. Why? Because serving them requires zero change from us.
Right. We get to stay the expert.
Exactly. We don't have to learn a new language. We don't have to change our service times. We don't have to feel awkward or incompetent. Reaching out to the likeness preserves our comfort and our illusion of expertise.
But the theology presented in the text brutally dismantles that comfort zone. It emphasizes that God's providential placement is rarely, if ever, determined by our comfort. In fact, throughout history, he routinely sets his people directly beside those who are most unlike them.
If we connect this to the bigger picture of the theology of placement we discussed earlier, this realization isn't just a clever marketing pivot. The text frames this as a deep theological correction.
How so?
The critical question for a church is not whether they feel naturally drawn to a specific demographic or whether a certain group fits their brand identity. The ultimate defining question is whether Christ has made them near.
Proximity is providence.
Exactly. If they are in your neighborhood, if they are across the street from your building, they are your assignment. Full stop. It does not matter if they do not fit your preferred demographic profile. It doesn't matter if serving them requires you to completely overhaul your methodology. Their proximity dictates your responsibility.
If they are near, they are the assignment. That entirely flips the script on how almost every organization operates today. Usually the process is, we huddle in a room, we define our ideal target audience, we create an avatar of our perfect customer or church member, and then we go out into the world and try to hunt them down, ignoring everyone else along the way.
Right, the targeted ad approach.
This framework is demanding the exact opposite. It is saying, look at the human beings who are actually physically around you right now and adjust your organization, your methods, and your heart to serve them.
It highlights the fundamental difference between existing as an institution that is primarily concerned with preserving its own familiar habits and existing as a people who understand they have been intentionally sent into a particular messy world.
So let's say the organization experiences this paradigm shift. They do the context map. They realize their assumptions were wrong. They identify the nearby and overlooked population that they have been missing for a decade. Seeing them is the first step. But how does an organization transform this new, overwhelming influx of data into actual spiritual and practical action?
Because the data isn't enough.
Right, because we all know that gathering data without executing on it is just collecting trivia. If it stops at a spreadsheet, nothing changes.
The material anticipates this exact problem. It transitions from sociological observation into what it calls the spiritual discipline of context. And it makes a definitive argument. Knowing a community should never, ever end in mere analysis.
Yeah.
Gathering demographic data is not the finish line.
What is it then?
The analysis must serve as the fuel for specific intercession, for deep, targeted prayer.
It says this discipline teaches a church to love in detail. I think that might be my favorite phrase in the entire document. Love in detail.
It completely reframes what it means to care about a place. Think about how most organizations, or even individuals, formulate their goals or their prayers. They are almost always massive, vague generalities.
Lord bless our city.
Right. A business says, we want to increase revenue and impact the culture. A church prays, Lord bless our city and help our church grow.
They sound nice, but they completely hollow.
Because they lack detail. But a church that has actually done the hard work of mapping its context, a church that knows the actual pressures its neighbors are facing, stops praying in generalities. They begin to pray with acute specificity.
The examples the text provides are so evocative of a team that actually has their boots on the ground. They aren't just praying for blessing. They are praying for trust to be established in a specific district that has been historically marginalized and is highly distrustful of institutions.
They're praying for tangible hope among a demographic dealing with massive factory layoffs.
They are interceding for healing in very specific family units dealing with the opioid crisis. Or, and this one is particularly sharp, they are praying for repentance in a wealthy suburban enclave where religious form has replaced living faith.
You cannot pray those prayers from a distance. You cannot pray for the specific despair of a laid-off factory worker if you have never bothered to sit down and have a cup of coffee with them. You have to be in the dirt to know what actually needs healing.
I want to pause here and ask you, the listener, a very direct question. I want you to evaluate your own life, your team, or your organization right now. Look at your strategic plans for the next quarter. Look at the goals you have set for yourself. How often are they just vague, floating generalities?
I want to be a better leader.
Exactly. Are you saying things like, I want to be a better leader, or we want to reach more people? Ask yourself honestly. Are your goals vague because you haven't done the hard, uncomfortable, time-consuming work to understand the specific details of the situation you are in?
The manuscript offers a profound, challenging quote regarding this exact dynamic. General compassion is good. Informed compassion is better.
General compassion is good. Informed compassion is better.
It routes this right back to the character of God. The theological argument is that God does not love the world merely as an abstract philosophical concept. He loves in detail.
He knows names.
He knows specific names. He knows the history of specific streets. He knows the exact nature of specific wounds. And the mandate is that the church, and really any leader or organization claiming to serve a community, must discipline themselves to do the same.
Informed compassion is what moves you from being an isolated institution, just trying to survive another fiscal year, to being an active, vital participant in the healing of a particular world.
Now, up to this point, the theory we've discussed is fantastic. The theology of placement, the art of translation, the dimensions of context, it is all conceptually beautiful. But what makes this specific source document so incredibly valuable, and why we're spending a whole hour on it, is that it refuses to leave the reader hanging in the theoretical clouds.
Yes, it gets very practical.
The final section of the text provides an incredibly detailed, highly actionable playbook. It gives leaders the actual tools to execute this shift from assumption to awareness.
Yes. The last section reads like an operational workbook. It is packed with actionable exercises that you could literally start doing tomorrow morning. We need to dig deeply into some of these because this is where the rubber meets the road. Let's start with the first one, the assumption audit.
The assumption audit is a brilliant exercise in intellectual vulnerability. The instructions ask a leadership team to get into a room with a whiteboard and write down 5 core assumptions their organization has made about the people, the needs, or the spiritual condition of their context.
These are the underlying beliefs that drive their current strategy.
Right.
So an assumption might be the young families in our neighborhood are looking for high-energy Sunday morning programming for their kids. Or the people in our city are extremely hostile to religion.
Right. You list those out. And then comes the painful part. For every single assumption, the team must aggressively demand actual evidence. You have to ask, what hard evidence do we actually possess that proves this is true?
Not just a hunch.
Right. What evidence are we missing? How has this specific assumption shaped the way we spend our money and our time? And the most crucial question of all, what would happen to our entire operational model if this assumption turned out to be completely wrong?
It forces a reckoning. Because you have to look at a massive program you've been running for 5 years, eating up thousands of dollars in volunteer hours, and say, wait, we built this entire thing on the assumption that the neighborhood wanted it. Do we have any actual proof of that, or did we just build it because we wanted to run it?
It forces you to separate your ego from the data.
Another incredibly practical tool provided is the 30-day field journal. It's a very simple concept, but it's designed to build a daily, unbreakable habit of observation.
I really love this one.
The instructions are, for 30 consecutive days, the leader must record one specific observation about their community, one actual conversation they overheard or participated in, one tangible need they identified, one open door or opportunity they noticed, and then they must take one small action based on those things every single day for a month.
Think about the cumulative effect of that.
Yeah.
By the end of 30 days, a leader who previously relied on vague familiarity now has 30 specific, granular data points about the actual lived reality of their community.
It's massive.
They have 30 names, 30 stories, 30 micro-actions. They are actively constructing the informed compassion we just talked about.
Then there is a framework that I immediately recognize, which we can call the GTD for ministry. GTD stands for Getting Things Done, which is a famous productivity framework by David Allen. But the text applies this methodology directly to contextual analysis. It calls this process task translation.
This is massive for addressing the cognitive overload that paralyzes leaders. When leaders are told they need to understand their context, they usually freeze, because that mandate is incredibly vague and terrifying.
It's just too big.
The text offers a framework to cut through that paralysis. Capture, clarify, convert.
Let's walk through exactly how that works.
First, you capture. You write down everything competing for your attention regarding your mission. Every vague task, every idea, every anxiety you have about your neighborhood, get it out of your head and onto paper.
Brain dump, basically.
Second, you clarify. You look at what you wrote down and you strip away the flowery, vague, spiritual language. You force yourself to be concrete about what the item actually means.
And then the magic happens in the third step. Convert. You must convert that clarified idea into a physical, executable next action. The text gives a fantastic example of this. It points out that a leader might have a to-do list item that simply says, study demographics, which is a terrible to-do list item. It's vague, has no finish line, and it sounds like a college term paper. No one wants to study demographics at 2 p.m. on a Tuesday, so your brain just avoids it entirely.
Exactly. The cognitive load of study demographics is too high, so the framework forces you to convert it. You change study demographics into a physical action. Walk the 3 blocks surrounding the building for 45 minutes on Wednesday morning and count the number of multifamily dwellings.
Oh, that's so much better.
Or call the principal of the local elementary school on Tuesday at 10 a.m. and ask what their biggest challenge is.
It translates an abstract, intimidating burden into concrete, undeniable physical movement. I know exactly how to walk for 45 minutes. I know how to make a phone call.
And once you have this list of concrete next actions, the text introduces one final sorting mechanism. You don't rank these tasks by what is easiest or by your personal preference. You rank them strictly by mission value. You ask, does completing this physical action actually help us understand our context better? Or is it just busy work designed to preserve our current routine?
So what does this all mean? I think it means that we finally have a way to take high-level, intimidating theology and turn it into a literal, step-by-step to-do list. There is one more exercise in the playbook that I want to highlight because it hit me right between the eyes. It's called the legacy filter.
The legacy filter is designed to combat institutional inertia.
Right. Before you take on any new task, or more importantly, before you continue pouring energy into an old existing program, you have to run it through this filter. You have to ask, does this activity help us know the field better and serve the people actually in front of us?
And the brutal question, is this program surviving only because it has always existed? Are we just feeding a dinosaur because we don't know how to put it down? It forces a leadership team to confront nostalgia. But I would argue that the most piercing diagnostic tool in the entire actionable playbook is the final one, the mission delay audit.
Oh, man. This one is tough. Listeners, brace yourselves.
It is deeply uncomfortable. The audit asks a leader to look back over the last 30 or 60 days and list every important mission-critical action they have consciously or subconsciously postponed.
Every hard conversation they avoided.
Every strategic pivot they delayed.
Yeah.
And then it demands that they answer a very hard question. Was this delay caused by a legitimate, unavoidable lack of time or resources? Or, if you are brutally honest, was the delay caused by fear, uncertainty, or avoidance?
Wow. Was I too busy or was I just scared?
It forces the leader to interrogate their own psychology. What specific decision am I avoiding right now because making it would force a massive change in my strategy? It exposes the reality that many leaders delay doing contextual analysis because they are terrified of what the new context will actually demand of them.
And they know it's going to cost them.
They know, deep down, that if they truly listen to the neighborhood, they might have to dismantle the very programs they spent 10 years building.
Taking reality seriously means you can no longer rely on borrowed success or past glory. You can't just run the exact same plays you ran in 2015 and expect them to magically work today. You have to face the field exactly as it is right now, today. And stepping out of your assumptions into that reality is inherently risky, it is exhausting, and it is deeply uncomfortable.
It is deeply uncomfortable. But as the entire manuscript forcefully argues from the first page to the last, it is the only possible way to be faithful to the mission you claim to serve.
We've covered an incredible amount of ground today unpacking this material. We started by diagnosing the hidden, quiet danger of assuming we understand our environment just because we feel familiar with our daily commute through it.
We explore the theology of placement, the challenging reality that you are planted where you are on purpose, and that proximity to a need implies a responsibility to engage it.
We talked about the crucial difference between the unchanging message and the highly flexible method, the vital art of faithful translation, and making absolutely sure we aren't stubbornly deploying award-winning snowplows in the middle of a Florida summer.
We examine the complex dimensions of context, moving beyond surface-level demographics to understand cultural pressures and economic realities. And we saw how finally recognizing the nearby and overlooked can completely revolutionize an organization's impact.
And finally, we walk through the hard, necessary work of building an actionable context profile. We learn how to move from vague, useless generalities into specific, informed intercession, and how to build daily, unbreakable habits of observation using tools like the assumption audit and task translation.
And I think it is vital to reiterate one last time. While the text we examine today is a framework explicitly designed for churches, pastors, and ministry leaders, the core truth pulsating underneath all of it is universally binding on human interaction. The truth is this: Love that does not observe will eventually misfire. A mission that refuses to listen will eventually misread the very people it is trying to save.
Whether you are leading a pastoral team in a megachurch, or you are building a new tech product in a garage, or you are running a local bakery, or you are just trying to be a better neighbor on your street, the foundational principle holds absolute. You absolutely cannot steward what you refuse to see.
You have to commit to doing the grueling work of observation. You have to willingly allow the messy reality of the world to challenge and dismantle your pristine assumptions.
Which leaves us with a final provocative thought for you to mull over as you finish your commute or your workout or whatever you are doing right now. This is inspired directly by the reflection questions at the very end of the manuscript. I want you to think about your current project, your organization, or your personal leadership role.
It's a great question to end on.
What if the biggest, most stubborn obstacle you are facing right now isn't actually resistance from the outside world? What if the problem isn't the economy or the culture or your competitors? What if the biggest obstacle is your own overconfidence in your understanding of the world?
It is a profoundly sobering question to ask yourself.
And to push it just one step further into reality, if your project, your organization, your church, or your specific leadership role simply disappeared tomorrow, who in your actual immediate physical surroundings would notice first? And what does their answer reveal about the true nature of your impact?